So I'm going to go ahead and get started with this fascinating story of Area 51. There are two aspects to this story. I'm going to first talk about its history as a military institution, as an institution where some of our most deeply held secrets are developed and tested. And then the second part is, how did Area 51 come to be associated with UFOs? Ruben and I were invited to give this presentation a couple of weeks ago at the National Atomic Testing Museum in Las Vegas, and we had a great time. We met up with Alejandro Rojas, with George Knapp, and a whole bunch of other folks. And those of you, I'm sure many of you have gone to Vegas, but the next time you're there, look up the National Atomic Testing Museum. It is the world's only museum, and it's an affiliate of the Smithsonian Institute, by the way. It is the world's only museum dedicated to the Cold War and the development and use of atomic weapons. And it's just an amazing place. I mean, you see prototypes of the bombs. You see, they have a walkthrough exhibit on the history of Area 51, which was also very interesting. But the museum is a wonderful place to visit. And Ruben and I ran into a number of, because a lot of folks that work in Area 51 live in the Las Vegas area. And of course they won't tell you that they work there, but we were told by the people at the museum that they get visitors who work out at Groom Lake quite often. So Ruben and I did this presentation together, but since he just finished his and I'm going to be having to shorten mine as well, we're going to give Ruben a break. I might have you comment.
Sure.
Especially the part about standing there at the front gate at Area 51 was an experience. Ruben has this gift where he's very perceptive of things that you can't see. I mean, he experiences these emotions and sensations. So in a little bit, I'm going to have him come up and tell you what he felt as we stood there looking at the armed guards at the entrance to Area 51. Ruben and I really didn't have much of an interest specifically in Area 51 when we were working on our books together. It did pop up on our radar screen from time to time. Ruben has mentioned two of our books, Mexico's Roswell and The Other Roswell, which are the two crash retrieval cases. Mexico's Roswell having occurred near Presidio, Texas, and the other Roswell having occurred near Del Rio, Texas. And when we were working on those books, in the Mexico's Roswell case, for example, we were plotting out the trajectory of the unknown object that eventually crashed with a small plane. And we were plotting out the course based on the information we have from the leaked documents that we obtained. And somebody pointed out, one of our fellow researchers pointed out to us that if the crash hadn't occurred in the area of Presidio, Texas, if the object had continued moving on the line, the trajectory upon which it was headed, it seemed to be headed toward the Groom Lake area. So then another researcher asked us, could it have been that this was an object that was being test flown out of Groom Lake? And so that was an interesting little tangent that took place when we were doing research for Mexico's Roswell, because it does seem that that craft might have been headed toward Groom Lake in Nevada. So anyway, the other little bump with Area 51 we had occurred in 2009, when it is believed that the object that crashed near Del Rio, Texas, disc that impacted into the sand and ended up against the side of a hill on the Mexican side near Langtree, Texas, that it was recovered by the U.S. military and possibly taken to Groom Lake. So that was the other just brief mention. And so it was after that that Ruben and I kind of became interested in the topic, and we started doing more research into one question that really burned in my mind was, how was it that this base became associated with UFOs in the first place? So that was the topic that we addressed in our conversation. How did Area 51 come into the collective public consciousness? When was it first, when did it become first kind of widespread belief that there was something strange going on at Area 51? And I think this was a pivotal moment in that development, also from the world of television. There was an episode in season 1 of the X-Files called Deep Throat. And although the name Area 51 and Groom Lake, the names were not used in this episode, it was quite obvious that the reference was to Groom Lake or Area 51. And it was, the fictional name in the show was Ellen's Air Force Base, which is a partial anagram of Nellis, located in Vegas. So this is where suddenly on primetime network TV on Fox, suddenly there was this revelation that something strange could be going on at this Air Force base. So the producers of the X-Files were tapping into a rapidly growing storyline about Area 51 that started developing in the mid to late 1980s, as we'll talk about a little bit later. And after the showing of this episode and a couple of other things that had a major impact on the development of Area 51 in the public consciousness, after that the whole thing exploded about Area 51. Now, a lot of people, when I give this talk, are surprised that Area 51 goes totally unmentioned prior to about the mid to late 1980s. There's no mention of Area 51 in any UFO literature. I have done extensive searching in the UFO literature prior to the 1980s, late 80s, and it's never mentioned because it was a non-factor among UFO researchers. Lately, of course, there's been a number of television shows, documentaries, and movies. There was a movie called 51, the movie released last year in 2014. I had a trailer here, which due to time constraints I'm going to have to skip, but you all can look this up. Another movie from which was called Area 51 was released just this year in May. Also, both fiction but based on some of the stories associated with the base. So both of those very interesting. But I'm going to start my story about the history of Area 51 with a denial, with a lie. The military base was built in 1955, but officially it did not exist. We all know this, that for years the government denied, for decades the government denied that it existed. It wasn't until 2013 when a set of documents were released that conclusively proved that Groom Lake / Area 51 did exist and was a venture that involved the Air Force, the CIA, and several aviation contractors. In 2013, there was no choice but for the government to admit that Area 51 as a place where high security, top secret research, primarily on aviation, is conducted, did exist. But just keep in mind that from 1955 until 2013, it did not officially exist. The government had a policy of denying that it existed. Sometimes it would say things such as there is an operating location associated with Nellis bomb range. So this was an interesting letter from 1999 that you see on the screen there. And it was sent by a member of the legislature. And this is the response they got from the Air Force. This responds to your letter to the Secretary of the Air Force regarding, quote, Area 51. Neither the Air Force nor the Department of Defense owns or operates any location known as Area 51. So, UFO researchers a lot of times make statements such as the government is lying about UFOs. And people get really riled up and say things like, the government never lies. Well, they did at least during this time period from 1955 to 2013. Because Area 51 did exist, and I'm going to show you some historical references to Area 51 that were inadvertently released. So it begins with a lie. It also begins with a very secure military compound for the testing of atomic bombs. That's the history of Area 51's development. As you can see in this graphic, the Nevada test site shown right in the middle in kind of the beige or brownish shading. That's where all the missiles were set off in the late 40s, 50s, and 60s. The above ground atomic testing, which by the way wreaked havoc on the environment, and the spread of the effects of the radiation affected many areas of the United States, as we'll show in a diagram. It didn't, although it didn't exist until later, after many of the early atomic bomb tests. You can see the location right up here, a little yellow square of what comprises Area 51, Groom Lake. And then here is the Nellis Air Force Range. All right, we're going to continue here. So Ruben and I went out there to find out for ourselves what the current status of the part that the public is allowed to go up to is. And as all of you have seen, no doubt, and read and heard, it's a situation where as long as you don't cross this imaginary line, you won't have any problems. You cross the imaginary line, if you cross past this sign that Ruben and I are standing in front of, I don't know if you can see this very well. Let's see if my... Right up here, right up at the top of that hill, there is an electronic surveillance tower, and then right next to it is a white pickup truck with distorted front windshield, so you can't see who's inside. And that's where the armed guards are. And they are poised to come down this little stretch of road. And what they do is they grab you and throw you down on the ground, face first, and they handcuff you with your hands behind your back. And then you basically sit there until the local sheriff's department arrives to take you to jail. So, and anybody that's tested this out has found that it works every time. So Ruben and I didn't want to do that. I don't know if you can see this very well in the picture, but there's barbed wire strewn across the forest, brand new. Our tour guide, who has been there on many, many occasions, and he's very careful to direct the people that he takes out there not to get into trouble. He told us that this barbed wire, this roll of barbed wire all along here, is something new, as well as this electronic surveillance equipment that's up here at the top of this hill. They are also monitoring everything that you say when you're standing there at the entrance to the base. So he told us to be careful about that. It's like you don't want to say anything about bombs when you're in the airport. This is a picture that I snapped of the actual sign that prohibits entry. It is unlawful to enter this area without permission of the installation commander. Good luck trying to track him down and get his permission. I don't think even the President of the United States can do that. But you'll notice that this sign is over an older sign that says Nellis Bombing and Gunnery Range. So that is, you know, how this whole area began as a bombing range. It was a place where people did not go because there were atomic bombs being set off all around there. And you don't want to be there when an atomic bomb is about to go off or has just gone off. So they figured that people would stay the heck out of there. And that's exactly what happened. I've got this little video that I took while we were standing there safely on the other side of the line. And you're going to see up on the hill, just behind the sign, you see the pickup truck and you see the tower, the electronic surveillance tower. And I think I'm going to, yeah, for some reason it stopped, so let me forward a little bit. I zoomed in on that, and our guide, who's been out there hundreds of times, told me that this equipment is new. So, this tower that you see there. Now, people tell me, well, there's nothing left at Area 51. There might have been mysterious stuff going on there in the past, but nowadays, there's nothing much there. Well, why are they still investing so much time, so much money, time, and effort in keeping it a secret then, if there's nothing going on there? Well, we do know there's stuff going on there, and some would say that it's just military technology being developed and tested, and others say there's other strange stuff going on there. Let me move forward a little bit here. I was really feeling pressure when I was filming this. I didn't want to get into any sort of trouble. My wife said, there are signs there that say no photography. What were you doing? What were you thinking? Well, you know, the guide that was with us said that it would be okay as long as we don't cross the line and then try to take pictures. Yeah, I found it incredibly interesting. As we approached the Area 51 entrance, the front of the truck would orient itself toward us. As we stopped maybe a quarter of a mile away, and the front of the truck was pointed right at our vehicle. Then we moved forward, got a little closer to the entrance and stopped again, and it had reoriented itself so that the front was right at us. And then when we got right up to the signs, it was again oriented right toward us. And the other interesting thing is the guard says that the windshield is made of a special glass that distorts the image of who's inside the truck. So you can never get a clear view of who's in there, but we do know that they are armed, and we do know that they respond very quickly if anybody crosses the line. So this is nervous me taking pictures. I'm not one of these thrill seekers who are trying to get into places that we shouldn't go. I do things from a safe distance. We're probably on their radar screen already, Ruben, so we don't need to go crossing Area 51. It's threshold. So anyway, just some more video that I took with my little handheld. You know, I was kind of behind the sign a little bit. I don't want to be completely obvious, but I say I'm going to get that guy up there on the hill, but I don't want to be so totally obvious. All right, so I think you get the picture. So it's a touristy thing, right? Everybody goes up to the entrance and they get their picture. Now my wife said, look, in red, photography of this area is prohibited. What were you doing? Well, we were just taking our cues from our drivers. What was our driver's name? Do you remember, Ruben? We don't recall, but he was a really funny guy and had a lot of Area 51 stories that he shared with us, some of which we actually hadn't heard before. So this is a close-up. It is unlawful to enter this area again. Everything's subject to search. Oh, by the way, when they grab you, throw you face down in the ground, and handcuff your hands behind you. They will take any kind of photographic equipment that you have on your person. So you'll get the equipment back, but there will be nothing left that you filmed. So I think we get the hint here. We can go up to this line, and then when this stuff starts appearing, when it becomes obvious, the funny story, one of the funny stories our guide told us is that another person that works for his company took a group of tourists out there, and he was messing with his cell phone or something, and he went past the boundary. So he quickly turned around and left. He knew there were going to be repercussions, and he got into serious trouble and was fired from his job. So he just barely went over, but barely, I guess, counts. We were amazed at the different kinds of devices that we saw out in the desert, because you got to remember, this is way out in the middle of nowhere. It's 150 miles or so north of Las Vegas. This was where they tested atomic bombs, okay? It's not a place you go for a fun weekend, you know. It's nowhere. And you've got all of this high-tech, sophisticated, solar-powered surveillance equipment, ground sensors. You've got sensors that measure the heat coming off of a body, and the computerization can detect whether it's a human body or an animal. And you've got all this sophisticated technology out in the desert in the middle of nowhere, recording people's audio, video, thermal signatures. It's amazing. Yeah, there's absolutely nothing to hide here. There's nothing that they're keeping secret. That's pretty obvious. Okay, the former reporter in me came through, and it was kind of windy, so some of this you won't be able to hear. It's just a short clip of me explaining that I'm standing right at the entrance to No Land. So this is where I'm standing here, is as far as any member of the public can ever go. In fact, very few people have gone beyond here, other than the employees of the base, those who are who are engaged in the various activities at the base, and a few public officials who are invited to come here. And that's it. That was my moment. So the camera was shaking a little bit. He was getting nervous. So let's go back real quick. I'm going to just take you through a quick survey of how it all began. You know, 1951 was when atomic bombs started to be exploded in Nevada, and it started with a 1 kiloton device, which was dropped at Frenchman Flat. It was seen and felt in Las Vegas, so which is, you know, like 100 miles, 100 to 150 miles away. People reported seeing this flash and feeling the effects. As you can see on this graphic, here is Frenchman Flat, down near the bottom of the test site, and so Las Vegas down near the bottom of this graphic, right down here. So the first atomic bomb went off there, and it was one of many.
Nevada, USA. This is the valley where the giant mushrooms grow. More atomic bombs have been exploded on these few hundred square miles of desert than on any other spot on the globe. Little bomb. Big bomb. Low bursts. And high bursts. Within the last last 2 years, 20 of these colossal blasts have echoed across the great barren stretches of the Southwest. This testing ground in our own backyard, just an aerial stone's throw from the Los Alamos laboratory, has been used only for experimental devices below certain power levels. Even so, it has been hugely valuable. It would have cost months of precious time and millions of dollars more to do this testing at the Pacific Proving Ground on Eniwetok Atoll.
Total number of nuclear detonations from 51 to 92. 1,021 of these firecrackers were lit. 100 of them were above ground. This site is considered one of the most radioactively contaminated sites in the entire world. Did you check us with a Geiger counter after?
We're still glowing.
We're still glowing. It is one of the most radioactively contaminated sites in the world and will remain so for thousands of years. Notice, and just a point of interest here, you notice that that whole territory of the test site is sectioned off into areas, and each area is given a number. So that's where Area 51 came from. It just happened to be the part of the map that's the section that's designated 51. So I started to say, I talked a little bit about how Nevada nuclear tests spread radioactivity throughout the United States in the 1950s. On this map, you see the dose in rads of where the radiation went from those above ground atomic tests. The darker red it is, the more contamination there was. The darker blue, then that means very little contamination. So even if you'll notice way down here in South Texas, way down here in the valley, we weren't dark blue. In other words, we weren't contamination free. We were still getting some impact, but most of it went to the north and northeast. There were a lot of dark areas there. So what happened next was we were setting off all these bombs and having a great time. And then we suddenly realized that Russia was doing the same thing. So we wanted to be able to keep up with them because we felt like they shouldn't be doing what we were already doing. So they wouldn't freely allow us to look at their atomic bomb tests. So we had to figure out a way to spy on them, basically. So the concept that was proposed by Lockheed and Kelly Johnson. Keep that name in mind because he's significant in the UFO story as well. Kelly Johnson, aircraft designer with Lockheed, proposed a very high altitude plane, 70,000 feet, flying at 70,000 feet, that could take high resolution, long distance photography of potential threats in the Soviet Union and then get us that information back. So, but they needed a place because this broke all the rules and conventions of that time period. They didn't want anyone to know that we were actually going to be overflying Soviet territory and uncovering their deepest, darkest military secrets. So they wanted to keep this hidden from the public. So this was this was one of the documents that was declassified in August 2013, just 2 years ago, where the Central Intelligence Agency finally admitted that Area 51 existed. And this document's very interesting because it talks about the origins of Area 51. It talks about the day that Kelly Johnson from Lockheed and several other men flew in a small plane, a Beechcraft, looking for a suitable place to test the U-2 spy plane, which is what that high altitude spy plane we were talking about was finally called. And the place they finally settled on was Groom Lake. And it says here, it says, well, let me back up because it's actually on this other slide. It says that there was an old Army airstrip there. And at first, they wanted to set down the Beechcraft on it. But as it turned out, once they decided to use the dry lake bed, and they were amazed at what a wonderful, completely level place to land aircraft that huge dry lake was. So that's where they landed. And just to put everything back into geographical perspective, we are in the extreme northeast corner of this military compound. So let me go forward here. So this is what Kelly Johnson said, and I'm going to talk about Kelly Johnson within the context of UFOs in a few minutes. We flew over it, and within 30 seconds you knew that was a place. It was right by a dry lake. Man alive, we looked at the lake and we looked at each other. It was another Edwards, referring to Edwards Air Force Base. So we wheeled around, landed on that lake, taxied up to one end of it. It was a perfect natural landing field, as smooth as a billiard table without anything being done to it. And this is a 1959 aerial photo of Area 51. Now here's where the story gets really interesting, because it turns out that UFOs in Area 51 there was actually a tie-in between those two subjects right from the beginning. Because the founder, one of the founders of Area 51, Kelly Johnson, had two very significant UFO sightings the year before Area 51 was opened. And these have been classified until recently, and they were recently declassified. And this is what Kelly Johnson, the designer of the U-2 and one of the founders of Area 51, said. That the object he and his wife were looking at, when it did not move or disintegrate, I asked my wife to get me our 8 power binoculars, so I would not have to take my eyes off the object, which by now I had recognized as a so-called saucer. As soon as I was given the glasses, I ran outside, started to focus the glasses on the object, which was now moving fast on a heading between 240 degrees and 260 degrees. The object, even in its glasses, even through the glasses, appeared black and distinct. And so he goes on to say that it was doing all this non-ballistic motion, unconventional motion. And then he talks about another sighting that he and his wife had had 2 years earlier. He said, Mrs. Johnson and I saw an object which I believed at the time and still do to be a saucer. This was west of Brent's Junction, California, a very dark night. I should state that for at least 5 years, I have definitely believed in the possibility that flying saucers exist, this in spite of a good deal of kidding from my technical associates. Having seen this particular object on December 16th, I am now more firmly convinced than ever that such objects or such devices exist. And I have some highly technical converts in the field as of that date. Now, when these documents came to light, it was very enlightening, because this was a gentleman who long before he designed some of the nation's most advanced stealth aircraft, he was drawing out what he saw moving around in the sky and was amazed at what he saw. If you'll notice, this is a drawing that he made in 1954 down at the bottom that he described to the Air Force in filing his report about the UFO. And it's a very stealthy aerodynamic shape, as you see down at the bottom. So one cannot help but ask, were his later stealth aircraft designs based, in part at least, on his UFO encounters? I think it seems clear that that definitely could have been the case. Let's talk about Area 51. Here are other names you may hear it referred to as Groom Lake, we've already said. Dreamland Resort, Dreamland. The whole Dreamland thing came about because the conditions in the Nevada desert are so extremely harsh. Nobody in their right minds would be out there unless they, for some reason, need to be. But they wanted to make it sound like an appealing place because a lot of engineers and workers from California were going to have to be flown out there to work in the middle of nowhere in the blazing hot desert. And so they came up with the name Dreamland Resort, kind of a tongue-in-cheek. Watertown, the Ranch, and Paradise Ranch. Other names that kind of tries to give it a favorable spin. The U-2 spy plane we've already mentioned, one of the Lockheed Skunk Works projects, the first one, and basically was essentially made obsolete once the spy satellite technology was advanced enough in the 60s. Now this is very interesting. We went back and we looked at every mention of Area 51 in the major newspapers in the United States since its creation in 1955, and we found tons of them. And these would slip by the American public because nobody was really thinking about Area 51, nobody really knew much about it, it wasn't well known. And even before Area 51 opened, there was this press release that was sent out pretty much to news agencies all over Nevada, in which they talk about construction. It says preliminary work on a small satellite Nevada test site installation. Okay, so that was the first indication that there was something interesting. A small satellite Nevada test installation to include runway, dormitories, and a few other buildings. Okay, that in black and white in print is the origin of Area 51. Now there were a lot of oops, and Ruben and I found so many newspaper articles that mentioned Groom Lake, mentioned Area 51. Here's an article from 1955 about the crash of a C-54 military transport plane. It was reported throughout the United States the plane was believed headed for a super secret Atomic Energy Commission installation at the nearby Nevada Proving Grounds that may have carried atomic scientists or other important officials. And the article says that the plane was on its way to Groom Lake, a top secret base for a joint Atomic Energy Commission Air Force installation under construction. So we found many other, there were stealth aircraft, U-2 aircraft, and other subsequent stealth aircraft that crashed nearby. And in many cases, the articles mentioned in this, for example, in this one, Watertown Strip in Nevada. Now this was an interesting case that we found in the newspapers. A civilian pilot flying out of California ran out of fuel and made an emergency landing right in Groom Lake, right in the middle of Area 51. He was immediately confronted, he was interrogated, held overnight, and then released. So this was amazing, happened in 1957. There were many other leaks. There was an Atomic Energy Commission booklet which described a small base at Groom Lake called the Watertown Project, which it characterized as a weather research station. And once again, at this time, this was a highly secret, one of the nation's top, most secret installations. 1963, there was a strike by construction workers, and the wire articles which went all over the country said men reported for duty at Area 51, where a super secret project is going on. Once again, nobody knew what Area 51 was. It hadn't been in the news, and these sorts of articles meant nothing to the general public. Now we can go back in time and say, why didn't anybody figure it out? Another crash The article mentions Area 51, and it mentions the U-2 spy plane. This was in September of 1967 when both Area 51 and the U-2 spy plane were classified top secret. In a CIA memo, the director of the CIA refers to Area 51. And this was declassified and made available to the general public. 1967, the U.S. Geological Survey accidentally released an aerial photograph of Area 51. 1974, the Skylab 4 mission released a picture that was inadvertently taken by the astronauts of Area 51. Groom Lake is right there in the middle. So, 1977 is the very first mention that I found related to UFOs, and it came from John Lear, the son of the inventor of the Lear jet. He gave a series of interviews and he released a document in which he first stated that he believed that the U.S. government had been working at Area 51 to unlock the secrets of extraterrestrials. And he also said that he felt extraterrestrials had been in contact with the U.S. government for many years and that the truth was deliberately being withheld from the public. Okay, but once again, this is 1977. This is the first mention that I can find anywhere of Area 51 being associated with UFOs. In 1980, how many of you remember the attempt to free the hostages in Iran, and then it was a disaster, the helicopters crashed? Well, the training for all of that was done at Area 51. The commando team that tried to rescue the 52 American hostages was trained at Area 51, and this was sent out all over the airwaves, all over the public, and it was, in this newspaper article, it even refers to the site as Area 51. So nobody was paying attention back then. 1984, there was another crash of a stealth aircraft, or actually a Soviet MiG jet fighter, which was being reverse engineered at Area 51. And, you know, the leaks continued. 1988, a Soviet satellite took several photographs of Area 51, and Popular Science magazine splashed it all over their magazine. And much to the chagrin of the CIA, they published these photographs in Popular Science. You can go back and look at that back issue. Now, somebody at the state of Nevada has a very interesting sense of humor, because this is a current aeronautical map for Nevada, and you'll see the image right where Groom Lake is, where the arrows. It's a little alien face. Right next to Groom Lake. So I love that, so I wanted to just show that to you. That is restricted airspace. People will get shot down if they go over that. There's been a lot of secret aircraft developed and tested at Area 51, such as the Lockheed 812, another Skunk Works project. It was also designed by Kelly Johnson, who had a strong belief in UFOs. It was also known as the Ox Cart. And there was a crash of one.
Despite the secrecy surrounding the Ox Cart, clues from an early mishap are finally coming to light decades later.
It was low altitude subsonic engine test. We had problems with getting the engine to accelerate out to Mach 3. We flew north out of the area and got up to 25,000 feet, headed south, and we started getting into the weather. Something just wasn't feeling right. It was losing airspeed, but it wasn't indicated. Pretty soon, the airplane pitched up, went up, got inverted, and went into a flat incipient spin. just can't recover. So I thought I better eject. So I ejected down because I was upside down.
Ken made the right decision and punched out.
What in my mind over then was I hate like hell to, have to bail out of that good airplane.
He landed somewhere out near Wendover, Utah.
I landed and collapsed the chute. I figured I was going to need that because I was going to probably be out there overnight and for survival, and I would use that to sleep in.
One of the most famous stealth aircraft, also developed by U2 creator Kelly Johnson, was the Blackbird, the SR-71. And it was also, it had all the stealth characteristics that we're starting to see more and more of in aircraft that are under development now. It was a precursor. And it was in service from 1964 to 1998. 32 aircraft were built. Some were lost in accidents, none were lost due to enemy action. Just giving you an overview, the drone technology started at Area 51. A lot of the drones are tested there, again by Skunk Works. The D-21 was one of the first military drones. The F-22 Raptor, single-seat, twin-engine, all-weather stealth tactical fighter, one of the most successful aircraft, stealth jet aircraft ever designed, was developed at Area 51. The Boeing Bird of Prey, which was instrumental in the development of unmanned aerial vehicles, drones. There's a recurring theme that observers of Area 51 have, and that is that a top secret aircraft known as the Aurora has been tested there since the late 1990s, since at least the 1990s. A hypersonic plane capable of Mach 5 or 6, using an extremely new engine technology that some people call pulse detonation. It kind of makes pulses or rings in the vapor trail behind it. And as recently as last year, there were reported sightings of this triangle-shaped plane making a very weird vapor trail behind it. The Lockheed Martin Skunk Works has admitted to the so-called son of Blackbird, which is the successor to the SR-71, the SR-72. It is capable of hypersonic speeds, Mach 5 plus, and it's been under development since 1989 and could be operational by 2030. So people who say that Area 51 is no longer really active, they really don't know what they're talking about. This is an excerpt from a recent magazine article about it. People have asked, could the SR-72 be the long-rumored Aurora spy plane? We don't know. It's possible that it isn't. But it's one of the latest iterations of the continuing efforts by the CIA, the Air Force, and its contractors to develop high-tech spy planes. This is very intriguing. Lockheed Martin on their website, as if it were really good public relations for them, admits to the development of the Falcon HTV-2. It's an unmanned rocket-launched maneuverable aircraft that glides through the Earth's atmosphere at incredibly fast speeds, Mach 20, approximately 13,000 miles per hour. So at these speeds, flight time between New York City and Los Angeles would be less than 12 minutes. I could come visit you a lot more often. Yeah. South Texas to San Francisco would be no problem at all. What happens at Area 51 stays at Area 51. There's a group, there's several groups that have been studying the area for a really long time. And they've been able to obtain pictures of the base, the buildings. You can actually go on Google Earth and get down fairly close to ground level and see all the buildings, which I'll show you in a minute. People who work at Area 51 are generally kept away from areas where they shouldn't be. They're told to be inside, windows are blacked out, whenever certain aircraft are being tested. We've also heard reports that people who normally are outside, they're told to lie on the ground with their face down at certain points until the aircraft are returned to their hangars. Some more views of the layout of the buildings. Area 51 was not the original UFO base. It was Wright-Patterson Air Force Base near Dayton, Ohio. And the reason Wright-Patterson drew so much attention was because in July 1947, after the crash of an unknown object in near Roswell, New Mexico, the newspaper coverage all over the world said that the debris from the crash had been taken to Wright Field near Dayton, Ohio, as it was known back then. And so it was, we think that after that, that people, especially people in the UFO research community, started to become suspicious of military bases and what might be going on there in terms of UFOs. Here is the bottom, the last line here in this slide is from one of the newspaper articles in July 1947. The debris from the Roswell crash, well, first up at the top it says that they were forwarding it to Wright Field, Dayton, Ohio for examination, and then at the bottom it says they said it had been sent to Fort Worth by Superfortress for transshipment to the Army Air Force Experimental Center at Dayton. So that was the first base that came on the radar screen of UFO researchers. And Wright-Patterson has been the base, the home base for a number of very historic and very well-known efforts by the government to investigate UFOs, including Blue Book. So by 1969, these various groups that you see on the screen had studied 12,618 reported sightings, 701 of which remained totally unexplained when the Air Force closed Project Blue Book. In a 1988 interview, Senator Barry Goldwater claimed that he had asked General Curtis LeMay for access to a secret UFO room at Wright-Patterson. And an angry LeMay replied to him, "Not only can't you get into it, but don't you ever mention it to me again." There's no mention of Area 51 in any of the UFO literature up to 1980. Wright-Patterson is mentioned prominently. And then in December of 1987, our friend John Lear, the son of the inventor of the Lear airplane, released a document or a statement in which he claimed that the U.S. military, that the U.S. government was hiding ET secrets at Groom Lake. This is one of the first, other than his previous statement in 1977, it was one of the first mentions of Area 51 associated with UFOs that I could find. So this led to an article based on Lear's comments, an article that appeared in a little-known magazine of the time called Gung Ho. And it was written by aviation writer Jim Goodall, in which it talks about that if people really knew what things are flying around over Area 51, let's just put it this way, we have things flying in the Nevada desert, said one Lockheed engineer, that would make George Lucas drool. So February 1988, Area 51 is starting to establish itself as a major player in the UFO research field.
I have had the opportunity over the years to interview, again, people who have worked at the test site at Groom Lake. One gentleman spent 12 of his 30 years in black programs at Groom Lake. When I asked him, I said, first of all, I said, do you believe in UFOs? And he looked at me with a straight face in one-on-one. He said, absolutely, positively, they do exist. I said, can you expand upon that? And he said, no, I can't. About a year later, we were talking about, again, activities at Groom Lake. And I asked him, I said, you know, can you really tell me what's happening out there? And he said, well, there's a lot of things that are going on there that I won't be able to tell you until the year 2025. But we have things in the Nevada desert that would make George Lucas envious. Another individual who was an NCO, an E9, which is the highest grade you can get as an enlisted man. He's a Chief Master Sergeant in the Air Force. Was a safety specialist. He had 3 different tours of duty at Groom Lake on various programs. Now, he had no connection with my friend who worked on the other black programs. We were talking, I interviewed him at Nellis in 1985, 86 time frame. And I said, what's out there? And again, he looked me straight in the eye and he said, we have things out there that are literally out of this world. I said, explain. He said, I can't. But trust me, see, we have things that are better than Star Trek, better than anything you can see in the.
In 1980, there were several, late 1980s, there were several television documentaries where supposed government officials spilled the beans on Area 51 and said that there was strange stuff going on there. October 14th, 1988 is a landmark. There was a 2-hour documentary during which Area 51 is mentioned prominently as being where UFO stuff was happening.
Contacts have grown to include Falcon and 9 other government agents.
And why do you believe them?
Well, because we've been able to meet with them, we've been able to check and verify credentials, and it's clear that they are in secret, need-to-know positions. Falcon's position, for example, gives him access to the MJ-12 infrastructure. Why don't we just hear it in his own words?
MJ-12 was a group of people within the government. MJ-12 was created by President Truman in the early 50s. And their job was to investigate, keep track of information pertaining to UFOs. Part of their job was scientific advancements. But their primary purpose was to keep track of the information coming in on UFOs and to analyze the information, both scientifically and in a way that would advance our technology. There are government officials and elected officials that are automatically briefed on the existence of the MJ-12 activities. These officials include the President, the Vice President, as elected officials, the Director of Central Intelligence, and the Director of the National Security Agency.
And then the thing that broke it completely open, November 1989, a gentleman named Robert Scott Lazar appeared in a special interview with investigative reporter George Knapp on Las Vegas television station KLAS, during which he said that while working at Area 51, he saw 9 flying saucers housed at a facility just south of the main base, Area 51. He described them, he gave very detailed and specific information. He said that the craft were powered by a mineral not native to the Earth, which he called element 115. He also claimed to have seen what he believes was a small gray alien standing in a room next to a human being.
This particular disc appeared to be in excellent condition, and because of its sleek appearance, I nicknamed it the Sport Model. The Sport Model is about 16 feet tall and 40 feet in diameter. The exterior skin of the disc is metal, which is the color of unpolished stainless steel. The Sport Model sits on its belly when it's not energized. As you can see, the hatch is located on the upper half of the disc with just the bottom portion of the door wrapping around the center lip of the disc. The interior level of the disc is divided into 3 levels. The lower level is where the 3 gravity amplifiers and amplifier guides are located. These are the things used to amplify and focus the gravity A wave that we learned about in our science lessons. The reactor is located directly above the 3 gravity amplifiers on the center level and is in fact centered between them. The reactor is similar to this half-scale model. The element 115 is machined into triangles like this and is then inserted into the reactor. This piece of element 115 is the source of the gravity A wave as well as the target that is bombarded with protons to release the antimatter, both of which we learned about in our science lessons. Here where this red arrow is where S4 is in relation to Groom Lake. It's kind of southwest of the main base. And it's interesting that these days, you know, that made quite a splash and it started this chain reaction effect where Area 51 was mentioned in almost every story about UFOs. And then Bob Lazar kind of dropped out of the UFO landscape. Nobody ever heard from him anymore. It's only until recently that he's come forward and started talking again. And he's basically these days saying that he kind of wishes he hadn't said what he said because it basically has made his life close to unbearable. And he got nothing from it. He said in one interview that people have the impression that a truck full of money arrives at in his driveway once a day and drops off all this money. He says, I never made a cent from it. And it has cost me a lot because he works in the field of selling scientific instruments to labs and so forth. So he took a big hit, he says.
Look, I am not out there giving UFO lectures, producing tapes. This is not a business of mine. I am trying to run a scientific business. And if I'm the UFO guy, it makes it really difficult. It's to my benefit that people don't believe the story.
These days, Lazar and his wife operate a scientific supply firm in Michigan. He's received media coverage because of the odd stuff he sells online, but not everyone has made the connection to Area 51 and the stampede he started back in 1989 when he told of working at S4 south of Area 51, where he saw flying saucers so advanced they had to be from somewhere else. This is a model of the reactor he says was able to generate its own gravitational field, powered by what he called element 115.
Barry turned on the reactor, which was a flat plate and half of a basketball essentially on it, just a hemisphere.
All right, so kind of piecing it all together, I'm going to skip over to some of the aerial views. It actually, if you like desert landscape and desert scenery, the area around Area 51 is beautiful. You know, as long as you don't get too close to where the atomic bombs went off, you might start glowing. But it is beautiful. Here in this picture you can kind of see the base over the mountaintops down near the bottom. And the government has bought up all the land around the base, so you can't really go anywhere to look down upon the base like you used to. These are some of the forms they give you if you're arrested trying to trespass. There's been a number of books written. Here are some close-ups. If you go on, you have to install Google Earth. And if you install Google Earth, which is free, you can actually get right down to the building level and you can see all of the buildings. Here's a hangar that was built in 2007. People say there's nothing anymore going on in Area 51. And yet they keep building bases. So I'd like to encourage everyone, if you're kind of interested in this topic, I recommend that you go with adventure photo tours. They will keep you safe. They'll take you right up to the front entrance. They are very reasonably priced. Ruben and I went with them, and we had a great experience. Their guides are very knowledgeable, and they operate out of Las Vegas, Nevada.
Area 51. For decades, this remote top-secret military facility in the middle of the high desert and mountain ranges of central Nevada was the best-kept secret on planet Earth, to the extent that even map makers were disallowed to show any roads leading to this non-existent location. It's said they have a crashed alien spaceship at this base and are reverse engineering its technology. Satellite imagery shows not only the existence of this base and its dozens of hangars and buildings, but an airstrip that is more than 23,000 feet long. They say Area 51 is virtually closed, that no one works there any longer. If that were the case, then why are there numerous daily flights carrying hundreds of workers from secret hangars at Las Vegas International Airport to Area 51? Our day starts with a stop at the Janet Airways hangars to show you the actual fleet of aircraft that, for years, has been hiding in plain sight alongside the Las Vegas Strip. We then pass by Nellis Air Force Base on the northern edge of Las Vegas and just outside the restricted airspace of the vast 4,700 square mile Nellis test range as we start our journey into the remote reaches of the Nevada high desert. This exciting and intellectual tour is not only a quest in search for answers, but it is stunningly scenic as we travel through some of Nevada's most beautiful and picturesque desert landscapes. Our next stop is a mysterious dry lake where many UFO sightings have occurred. There are ancient Indian petroglyphs that resemble aliens and what became of the occupants of this long-abandoned vehicle. There's such mystery and intrigue attached to Area 51 that the state of Nevada named the highway that goes to the little town of Rachel the Extraterrestrial Highway. We'll have lunch at the famous Little Alien. Have an alien burger if you wish. This location was used as the main filming site in the movie Independence Day. After lunch and refreshments, we stop at the Black Mailbox, a famous meeting location for UFO observers and enthusiasts. And then we drive through the middle of the very strange mutant Joshua Tree Forest. We finally reach our holy grail, the point at which our journey must stop, the absolute perimeter of Area 51. The signs read, Top Secret Military Facility, Do Not Enter, Use of Deadly Force Authorized. The armed guards, or as we call them, the men in black, guard this remote outpost with their high-powered weapons 24 hours a day. There are cameras and listening devices that we can see scattered throughout the desert. At this point, it all becomes very real. This is not just some tall story. This is not a fiction novel or a movie set. This is Area 51. What is it that they do here? What are they hiding at Area 51? Take an Area 51 tour with Adventure Photo Tours from Las Vegas, and together we'll investigate this mysterious top-secret military facility.
Also, in closing, for everything you ever wanted to know about Area 51 and its connection to UFOs, I recommend only one website, dreamlandresort.com. These are the guys that broke a lot of the information that we have about Area 51 back in the 90s, and they're still keeping with it. So it's been a pleasure to talk with you all today, and I hope I have sparked a little spark of imagination about the connection between Area 51 and UFOs.
Mr. Noe,
thank you.
But let me, you mentioned earlier that you were in a museum,
Yes, sir.
Atomic Test Museum?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I learned early this year that I flew right over the Area 51, not knowing, taking a crop duster from Lake Charles, Louisiana to Reno, Nevada.
Nobody contacted you during your flight?
Nobody.
Okay, for those who can't hear, he said he flew a crop duster right over Area 51, unbeknownst to him at the time. What?
On my left was the air base, maybe half a mile feet over the ground, a strong northeast wind. So I was
So you were very low.
very low.
What year would you say that was?
1970.
1970.
I learned that I flew over Area 51 44 years later after being in the museum.
Oh, wow.
And the plume that went up from on the left when I was flying over the craters looked like the moon.
Well, sir, you're very lucky to be alive. So congratulations.